So I want to contextualize this video, which is going to be a response to Steve, who did three really great video responses to my um, video about Christianity that was directed at Venom Fang X. I suppose that's the most I could have hoped for, um, was a reasonable response from someone else. But I want to contextualize this response as um, an example of something that I've been thinking about in terms of economics lately, and that is the difference between using or consuming and producing or creating or really reproducing. Because in the economic sense, um, the only thing on the earth that really produces anything are plants, right? Photosynthesis is the real producer of energy on this planet. Now, no energy can be created or destroyed, right? But the plants capture energy from outside the Earth system, from the sun, and they convert it into chemical energy that can be used by itself, by plants, and by all other animals. So you take away plants, and all of a sudden, life, all higher forms of animal life, die. So this difference between use and produce, I think, is involved in every economic decision that we make. Um, in our current, declining certainly, but still current techno-industrial capitalist system, we use, we buy, we throw away. I mean, to use implies that it's a linear sort of process. There is what we call production in capitalism. You make the product, you package it, you advertise it, you sell it. When the consumer is done consuming it, they throw away what's left. That's called pollution. And really, pollution represents, in any economic system, that which has become unconscious to the system itself. And unless, our civilization can turn this um, unconscious noise called pollution into information which can feed back into the system, then we're going to poison ourselves and the rest of the community of life on Earth. So I think somehow or other we need to shift away from an economy based on use and consumption to an economy based on reproduction, creation, play, and based on a knowledge, an economy based on a basic knowledge of the true productive and creative capacity of the Earth system in which we are embedded. Not in terms of money, and not in terms of ecosystem services, in terms of a qualitative form of value and energy. Because energy, I would say, in the cosmological sense, is not quantitative. Physics studies quantities, ideal quantities, mathematical calculuses, which give it a high degree of uh, control over and ability to predict what is called nature, which is really a term in an equation, or various terms that can be measured, entered into equations. Um, and I don't want to get too far into the intricacies of physics because I don't really know the intricacies of physics in terms of the math. But I do know that energy is more than a mere quantity. Energy uh, evolves and transforms, and it's more, physics defines energy as the ability to do work. And it's interesting how it's borrowing a sociological term, uh, socioeconomic term, in order to describe the most fundamental substance or process out of which the universe is constantly constructing itself, energy. But instead of defining energy as work, as our current civilization has, perhaps it needs to be redefined as play. And I think this is what Whitehead is trying to get us to recognize, and really what a lot of the spiritual and religious traditions of both the East and the West are trying to get us to see. Um, Spirit is at play with itself, and that process of play is creative and destructive. It's transforming constantly into something new, though always valuing uh, the past. Certain iterations, certain repetitions, certain reproductions are valued more than others, and so you get an evolution in a direction, um, towards an end, a goal. There's reason at work in the world beyond the human skull, beyond human culture and language. And so I think what's really motivating me here is not the desire to convince people that there's a particular sort of divine hierarchy operating or anything like that. Rather, what's motivating me is a sense for the dire circumstance in which we find ourselves and the need for a completely new um, way of being and knowing. And Steve, to hone in on some of the particular things that you were saying in your great responses. You're asking me not to fall over the precipice into, I guess, New Age Ken Wilber type sort of philosophy, or metaphysics in the Barnes and Noble sense. But I think the situation is such that we've actually the mainstream, whether it be analytic philosophy, let's say, as the main academic um, bastion or power is, I think, part of the problem. And so it's not that I don't know. I think I do have a decent critique of some particular analytic philosophers in general, but or in particular, but in general, I think an obsession with language and with humanness rather than with cosmicness has infected the analytical tradition, and certainly it's infected the phenomenological tradition to the extent that it remains Kantian. And I think even Heidegger, to the extent that he refused to get into cosmology and to really look at scientific knowledge and the materialism that we take for granted with a critical philosophical eye, I think he remains Kantian. But even Jung can remain Kantian in much of his work. And I think the challenge for us is to get beyond that sort of relativism where we can't know the universe in itself, and instead recognize that what it is to be human is in fact the crescendo of the cosmos' process. Not to toot our own horn, and that now that I hear myself say it sounds very anthropocentric, but it's not that we are anything but the cosmos. It's not anthropocentric. It's that we are the center of the universe. The universe. So it redirects attention away from the human to the universe as that which continues to bring forth what we call the human. So all of civilization then is grounded in this larger cosmic process of becoming. It isn't separate from it, never was. But there's this loose or loose gear in the system, or there's a spark in the machine, and it's a metaphor that I think is annoying for a lot of people, and I'm not necessarily attached to it, but there seems to be something like that going on, and rather than say that this ancient, 1,000-year-old tradition, thousands of years old, is wrong, why wouldn't we say that dualism is just a slightly skewed perception of a true reality, which is that there's kind of this polar relationship between things, and matter at its core has this immaterial instability. You don't even know what to call it. It isn't a what, it isn't a substance. The basis of matter is, well, energy, as we say, right, which is more of a process. So it seems like a paradox, and as you said, paradox is the guardian of truth, which I think means that when we reach the truth, we can't quite say what it is. We can offer a paradox which points us around its general vicinity. It allows us to hone in on its center of gravity, but we can never capture it. So what's the point of all this? I guess that, if we were going to try to Christianize cosmology, what would that mean? And I think it's a very unnecessarily provocative way of putting it. I think the Christ label it's a cultural symbol that was invented by a particular people. It doesn't necessarily have the same meaning for everyone who hears it. So instead of talking about a biblical word, I think that the Christianization of cosmology could also just mean raising cosmology to the level of something sacred, rather than simply instrumental, or saying that it's all a matter of curiosity, of idle curiosity. I think cosmology can be more than that, and it seems to have become that. You know, academically, though of course many physicists are very passionate about their work, and do have a lot to say about God, even if it's in the negative rather than the affirmative. So I guess, I've said a lot, and I like to sort of meander like this, and I think, Steve, when you say that I'm humble, it's got more to do with my desire to sort of explore than it does with my humbleness, because to even do philosophy is a pretty pretentious thing, and in my case, even, well, it's pretentious, or in my case, precocious as well. So there's a kind of extreme lack of humility that anyone trying to do philosophy is displaying. But I think as long as we can redirect this lack of humility to the larger universal process itself, and to the extent that we can in every moment of our lives come to identify with that, then the hubris of this sort of anthropocentric glorification of oneself can be escaped. We sort of have to, expand our own balloon, or pop our balloon, such that we open to the larger expansion of the universe. But always, I think, in order to avoid a dualism between consciousness and space or extension, we need to recognize that these are related in a polar sort of way. So as the universe extends, consciousness intends. As the universe grows larger and more complex, consciousness grows more folded in upon itself, more reflexive, more intelligent. These aren't two separate substances. These are two poles in the same dynamic process. So, Whitehead's metaphysics, his ontology, is not dualistic, it's polar. Process is polarity in some sense, so that substance is no longer simply itself, but always in relationship to something which is other, but not fully other, not so other that the oneness and the wholeness isn't still maintained. So hopefully some of that made sense. Let me know what you think. And really, thanks for your videos. I really enjoyed the reflection that you were able to direct back at me. Very helpful. So thanks, Steve.